In episode 67, titled Geocoding as Enrichment, Location Features with Realistic Expectations, the goal is to use location features carefully to add context without overpromising, because location can be a powerful signal and a significant risk at the same time. Teams often assume that adding geography will automatically improve prediction, but location data is messy, sensitive, and easy to misinterpret if you treat it like a clean numeric feature. The exam cares because geocoding brings in enrichment trade-offs. You gain context, such as proximity, coverage, and regional differences, but you also inherit ambiguity, missingness, and privacy exposure. In real systems, location features can sharpen operational decisions when they align with genuine mechanisms, such as delivery time, service access, or regional threat patterns, yet they can also encode bias if used carelessly. The disciplined approach is to treat geocoding as a contextual layer, not as a magical explanation for outcomes. If you can set realistic expectations, you can use location to improve decisions while keeping governance and ethics intact. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to the DataX books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. Geocoding is the process of converting addresses into coordinates or place identifiers, meaning you take a human-readable location description and map it to a standardized geographic representation. Coordinates typically mean latitude and longitude, which give a point on the map, while place identifiers represent a resolved address or location entity in a geocoding system. This conversion can support consistent joins, distance calculations, and regional grouping, but it also introduces uncertainty because address text can be incomplete, misspelled, outdated, or ambiguous. The exam expects you to recognize that geocoding is not simply a lookup. It is a resolution process that may yield approximate matches, multiple candidates, or partial confidence. Geocoding quality depends on input quality and on the coverage and rules of the service, which is why the same address can yield different results across providers or across time. When you define geocoding clearly, you emphasize that the output is an interpreted mapping, not an unquestionable ground truth. Once you have geographic representations, you can derive features like distance, region, density, and travel time, and these are often more useful than raw coordinates. Distance to a store, a service center, or a hub can capture logistical friction and can explain outcomes like delivery success, support resolution time, or service usage patterns. Region features can capture policy differences, market differences, regulatory regimes, and threat environments that vary geographically, as long as you interpret them as context rather than as inherent properties of people. Density can approximate urban versus rural context, which can influence connectivity, access, and usage patterns, though it must be used carefully to avoid proxy bias. Travel time can be more meaningful than straight-line distance when roads, traffic, and geography matter, but it also requires additional assumptions and data sources. The exam often tests whether you choose derived, interpretable geographic features rather than dumping raw coordinates into a model with no plan for meaning. When you choose these derived features, you are translating location into mechanisms that plausibly influence outcomes. Location quality issues are a practical constraint because ambiguity, missingness, and outdated records can turn a promising location feature into a noisy or biased input. Ambiguity appears when an address is incomplete or when multiple places match a description, such as a street name repeated across cities. Missingness appears when addresses are unavailable, masked, or unparsable, and missingness can be segment-specific, which creates systematic bias if you treat missing as zero or ignore it. Outdated records appear when people move, businesses relocate, or service boundaries change, meaning the address in the system may not reflect current reality. Geocoding services can also return approximate results, such as snapping to a centroid, which can be acceptable for regional grouping but misleading for fine-grained distance computations. The exam expects you to treat location as probabilistic and imperfect, and to include quality checks and fallback behavior in your design. When you narrate location quality limitations, you are setting the expectation that location features can help, but they must be treated as noisy context rather than precise truth. Privacy risk is central because location can identify people and sensitive behavior, even when you do not intend to identify anyone. A coordinate can effectively pinpoint a home or workplace, and repeated location traces can reveal routines, affiliations, and personal circumstances. Even coarse location can be sensitive if it reveals membership in a small community or association with a protected site, and it can become re-identifiable when combined with other attributes. The exam expects you to consider privacy as part of enrichment, not as an afterthought, and to recognize that location is among the most sensitive data types in many governance frameworks. Responsible use includes minimizing precision when not necessary, limiting access, using aggregation, and ensuring that collection and processing comply with policy and law. When you describe privacy risk clearly, you also justify why some location uses are unacceptable, even if they would improve predictive performance. Location enrichment must be evaluated not only for signal, but for whether the signal is worth the privacy exposure. Granularity choices are how you balance usefulness and privacy, because you can represent location at many levels, such as exact point, neighborhood, city, or region. Exact points enable precise distance and travel time features but carry the highest privacy risk and are most sensitive to geocoding errors. Neighborhood and city-level representations reduce identification risk and can still capture meaningful context like service access and local market conditions, often with better robustness to small address errors. Region-level features can support policy and coverage logic while further reducing privacy exposure, but they may be too coarse for decisions that depend on precise proximity. The exam often tests whether you can choose an appropriate granularity given the decision context, and the safest correct answers usually prefer the least precise representation that still supports the decision. Granularity is also a modeling decision because it determines how stable the feature is under address changes and how likely it is to encode sensitive personal information. When you narrate granularity choice, you are demonstrating that you can trade precision for safety and robustness when appropriate. It is also important to avoid encoding location as raw identifiers without meaningful structure, because raw IDs can behave like high cardinality categories that models memorize without learning generalizable geographic relationships. A place identifier can be useful for lookups and joins, but as a model input, it can create sparsity and overfitting, especially if many IDs are rare. Raw coordinates have structure, but models can still struggle to learn meaningful geography without engineered features, because proximity and boundaries matter more than raw numeric values in isolation. Meaningful structure often comes from derived measures like distance to relevant points, membership in service areas, or region risk tiers that reflect operational realities. The exam expects you to recognize that location needs representation that aligns with the mechanism you care about, not just a unique tag that distinguishes one address from another. When you avoid raw IDs as predictors, you reduce leakage-like memorization, where the model learns a specific address is high risk because of historical labels rather than learning why location matters. This is especially important for deployment, where new addresses appear constantly and memorized IDs do not generalize. Scenario practice helps make these ideas concrete because location features are most defensible when they map to clear operational mechanisms. Distance to store is a classic feature when outcomes depend on proximity, such as service usage, delivery success, or customer satisfaction driven by travel burden. Region risk can be defensible when regional threat environments, regulations, or infrastructure differences plausibly influence outcomes, as long as you interpret it as context rather than as an attribute of individuals. Service coverage is another strong scenario, where membership in a coverage area determines eligibility, latency, or expected experience, making location a direct driver of outcomes through access. The exam often tests whether you can pick the location feature that matches the story, and the correct response emphasizes mechanisms like access, distance, and coverage rather than vague claims that location matters. When you narrate these scenarios, you also show that you can limit location use to contexts where it is clearly relevant and justifiable. Location features must be validated against baselines, not assumptions, because it is easy to assume geography will help and be wrong. Sometimes location is redundant with other variables that already capture the same context, such as region encoded elsewhere or service coverage implied by account type. Sometimes location improves performance only in certain segments, such as rural regions or new customers, and adding it globally may add complexity with limited benefit. Sometimes location appears predictive because it proxies for other factors, and that predictive value can be ethically problematic or operationally fragile under policy change. The exam expects you to confirm value through controlled evaluation rather than to treat enrichment as automatically beneficial. Validation should include stability checks and segment checks because geographic signals can be uneven and can drift over time as populations move or services expand. When you validate carefully, you are proving that location adds decision value beyond what you already have. Bias is a critical concern because location proxies can encode socioeconomic differences unfairly, and location-based features can concentrate negative outcomes on certain communities even when the intent is purely operational. A model may learn that certain neighborhoods correlate with higher fraud, higher churn, or higher incident rates, but those correlations can reflect structural factors, measurement differences, or historical bias rather than individual behavior. Using location in decisions can then reinforce disparities, such as applying stricter review to certain regions, increasing friction for certain users, or allocating resources in ways that reduce service quality for already disadvantaged areas. The exam expects you to recognize proxy risk and to consider whether location features should be restricted, aggregated, or replaced with more directly relevant operational signals. Responsible practice includes fairness analysis across segments, careful governance review, and transparency about how location influences decisions. When you narrate bias risk, you are showing that you understand that predictive value does not automatically imply ethical acceptability. Documentation is essential because geocoding often relies on external services with licensing, usage limits, and update cadence that affect both legality and model stability. You need to document which geocoding source was used, what terms apply, how often maps and place databases are updated, and how address resolution confidence is handled. Update cadence matters because changes in the geocoder can shift coordinates or place IDs over time, which can change derived features and model behavior without any change in underlying reality. The exam treats this as governance and reproducibility because external dependencies can create silent drift if not controlled and versioned. Documentation also supports incident response when stakeholders ask why a particular location was treated differently, because you can trace the derivation path. When you document sources and cadence, you treat geocoding as a managed dependency rather than a casual enrichment step. Deployment handling must anticipate new addresses and changing maps because production systems constantly encounter novel locations, new developments, and changing boundaries. You need safe behavior for ungeocodable addresses, such as falling back to coarser region or marking unknown, rather than failing or assigning incorrect coordinates. You also need to handle map updates that change travel times or service areas, ensuring that model inputs remain consistent or that retraining and recalibration occurs when changes are material. The exam expects you to plan for these realities because location data is not static and models that depend on it must be resilient to change. This includes monitoring geocoding failure rates, tracking the distribution of derived features, and validating that location signals remain stable and fair over time. When you describe deployment handling, you are demonstrating operational maturity. Enrichment is only valuable if it can be maintained reliably. A helpful anchor memory is, location adds context, but also risk and noise. Context is the main benefit, providing information about access, proximity, and regional conditions that can improve decisions. Risk includes privacy exposure and fairness concerns because location is sensitive and can proxy for protected characteristics. Noise includes geocoding ambiguity, missingness, outdated records, and map changes that can degrade feature quality. This anchor helps on the exam because it prevents overconfident answers that treat location as a free accuracy boost, and it encourages a balanced response that includes validation, governance, and safe defaults. It also helps in practice because it frames location enrichment as a trade-off decision rather than a purely technical upgrade. When you keep the anchor in mind, you choose location features that are defensible, robust, and aligned with the decision's mechanism. To conclude episode 67, pick one location feature and state its safest use, because safe use is the one that delivers value while minimizing privacy and bias risk. A defensible feature is distance to the nearest service center or store, computed from geocoded coordinates and then used at a coarse resolution to support logistics and service planning rather than individual punitive decisions. Its safest use is to inform operational resource allocation and coverage analysis, such as identifying areas where distance correlates with delayed service and prioritizing improvements, while avoiding using fine-grained location to assign individual risk scores that could encode socioeconomic bias. You would validate that distance improves predictions beyond baselines, monitor for geocoding quality issues, and treat missing or ambiguous addresses with cautious fallback rules. You would also choose the least precise representation that supports the decision, such as city-level or service area membership, to reduce identification risk. This approach reflects realistic expectations. Location can improve context-driven decisions, but it must be handled with privacy, fairness, and noise awareness as first-class constraints. Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit DailyCyber.News.